Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. Imagine leaving the country for work only to come back and find 4 brand new houses built on your land, complete with an HOA that says you are the problem and that they own your land. When I refused to back down, they called me a squatter and I honestly don't know what to do. Here is what happened. And the XXL HOA title story starts like this. So this happened over the span of a few years, and it starts with a little rectangle of dirt that I thought would someday be my quiet place. Before everything, my life was pretty normal. I had a job that let me work remotely for stretches, and I'd always wanted some space that was not cramped between walls and traffic. I bought a small chunk of land just outside of town. Not big enough to run cattle or anything, but big enough that I could wander around with a coffee in the morning and not see anyone if I didn't want to. There was a scraggly tree line on one side, a gully that filled up after storms, and a view of a sunset that made me feel like I was living in a postcard. It was not too fancy, no utilities, no structures, just dirt and potential, and a couple of survey stakes with neon tape that flapped in the wind like they were happy to be there. I bought the parcel outright with savings, and I know some people will ask, so yeah, I had title insurance, and yes, the deed was recorded properly. The legal description on my deed was something out of a geometry final, meets and bounds, bearings and degrees, distances from iron pins. I didn't fully get it at first, but the title company walked me through it with a highlighter and a plat. They even gave me a laminated copy of the plat map. I stuck it in my folder with the closing docs and put that folder in a fireproof safe because my dad raised me right. A few months after closing, I had to leave the country for work for what was supposed to be a long-term assignment. It came with housing and a stipend, and honestly, it was a career break I couldn't pass up. I love my job and I didn't plan on building on the land yet anyway. Taxes were low because it was so unimproved. I set up automatic payments for property taxes, told a neighbor I trusted that he could park his trailer near the edge if he wanted, and then I left. That was the last time I saw my little slice of quiet for a long while. I kept busy, I sent postcards to family and ate a lot of food that I cannot easily get back home. Every once in a while, I would open my email to see the county tax notice come through, verify the amount and file it away in a folder called Do Not Mess Up. My neighbor would occasionally send me a photo after a storm just to say, "Your tree survived," or "The gully is still a gully." Nothing looked off, nothing hinted at the mess brewing. What I didn't mention yet is that keeping busy ended sooner than I planned. About 18 months into the assignment, I got a call at 3 in the morning. My mom's voice was steady in that terrifying way that means she's been crying for hours and has no tears left. "It's your grandma. You need to come home." Grandma had raised me as much as my parents had. When I was little and my folks both worked double shifts, she was the one who walked me to the bus stop and made sure I knew my multiplication tables. She taught me to fold fitted sheets, even though I still cannot do it right. She showed me how to make her biscuits, which required Crisco and a light hand, and approximately 0 measurements because you just know when the dough feels right, baby. And she was the one who sat with me the night before I bought the land and asked if I was sure, not because she doubted me, but because she wanted me to doubt myself just enough to be certain. When I told her about the scraggly tree line, the sunset, she smiled and said, "That sounds like a place where you can hear yourself think." I didn't know then that those words would loop in my head years later like a prayer. The cancer had been quiet. She had some tests done while I was overseas, brushed off the early symptoms as getting old, and by the time they found it, it had already made itself at home in her lungs, liver and bones. The doctors gave her 6 months, she lasted 4. I came home on an emergency flight that felt like it took years. I went straight from the airport to the hospice facility, which is a term that sounds clinical until you're walking down a hallway that smells like antiseptic trying to cover up something sadder. Her room was small. There was a window with blinds that didn't close all the way. There were flowers from the church ladies and a kilt from her sister and a whiteboard with her medication schedule written in someone else's handwriting because she could not hold a pen anymore. She looked so small. That's the thing they don't tell you about watching someone die. They shrink. Not just physically, though that's part of it. It's like they're already pulling away into some other dimension, and what's left is just an outline. Her hands were paper thin and bruised from IVs. Her hair, which she had always kept curled and sprayed into submission, lay flat and gray against a pillow. But when she saw me, her eyes lit up the way they always had, and for half a second she looked like herself again. "You came back," She whispered, "Of course I came back," I said, and my voice cracked so hard I had to sit down. My mom and my aunt were there too, taking shifts, but Grandma wanted me close at night. She said that I was good company and did not hover like a hummingbird, which was her way of saying that I knew when to sit quiet and when to talk. I slept on the pull-out couch in her living room, so I could hear her if she needed anything. Most nights she would call out around 2 or 3 in the morning, not because she needed help, but because the fear would get too big in the dark and she needed to hear a voice. I would go sit in the chair next to her bed and hold her hand, which felt like holding a bird, and she would talk about things that didn't matter and everything that did. She told me stories I'd heard 100 times and some I hadn't. She told me about her first car, a green Ford that barely ran, and how she had learned to drive on gravel roads because that's all there was. She told me about my grandpa who had been gone 15 years, but who she still missed like a phantom limb. She told me she was proud of me for buying the land and for taking the job overseas, for not being afraid to want something, and she cried once late at night and said that she was sorry she wouldn't get to see what I built there. I told her that was okay, that I'd build it anyway, and think of her. She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had and said, "You'd be better. Don't let it just sit there like a dream you're scared to touch." The days blurred together. Hospice nurses came and went, we adjusted medications, we played old movies on a laptop because she liked the noise, and we sat in silence when words felt like too much. I read to her from a paperback western she loved, doing all the voices, and she smiled even when I knew she was too tired to follow the plot. My mom made soup that nobody ate and my aunt brought iced chips. I learned to give morphine doses and check oxygen levels and stay calm when her breathing got ragged and uneven, even though inside I was screaming. One afternoon she asked me to open the blinds all the way so she could see the sky. It was overcast, nothing special, but she stared at it like it was the most beautiful thing in the world. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Not to me, just out loud, and I knew what she meant. She died 3 days later, early in the morning, when the world was still grey and the birds had not started yet. I was there, my mom was there, her breathing just got slower and slower, and then it stopped. And the room felt different immediately, like someone had opened a door to somewhere else and the draft had changed everything. We sat with her for a while because that's what you do. We cried, we called people, the funeral home came. And then she was gone, and I was standing in her empty house surrounded by casserole dishes and sympathy cards and the weight of a grief so big I didn't know where to put it. I stayed for the funeral and the reception and the awful week after, where you have to sort through someone's entire life and decide what to keep and what to donate and what to throw away. I kept her recipe box and the kilt and a photo of her and my grandpa on their wedding day, where they both looked impossibly young and happy. I kept a coffee mug that said "World's Best Grandma" in peeling letters. I kept a lot of things I didn't need because letting go felt like betraying her. My boss was understanding. The company extended my leave, but after a month, reality crept back in. Bills, logistics, the need to do something other than sit in grief. The overseas position was still there, but they had moved me to a different country for the next phase of the project. It was supposed to be another year, maybe 18 months. I almost said no. I almost stayed and tried to figure out what normal looked like without her, but then I thought about what she has said about not letting my dreams sit there, and I thought about the land and the automatic tax payments still ticking along, and I packed my bags again to go to the new work assignment. So I got on the plane, I went back to work, I kept paying the taxes. Fast forward through the work stint, when I finally came back, the first thing I wanted was to take a drive out and stand on my dirt again. Nothing clears jet lag like fresh air and old plants. I drove out with a coffee and my expectations set low, maybe a few more weeds, maybe some new wildflowers. What I did not expect was a paved street with an archway sign, landscaping rocks and a cheery little banner that said, "Welcome to HOA." I had to double check my GPS because it felt like I'd taken a wrong turn into a brochure. HOA, by the way, did not exist when I left. The little 2-lane road that used to run past my land now had a turn lane and a stone monument that looked like it was straight out of a master plan community ad. There were streetlights, there were shiny mailboxes. There were 2-story craftsman wannabes with "coming soon" signs and porta potties and work trucks with logos, and in the middle of all of that, where my quiet rectangle was supposed to be, there were 4 finished houses and 2 under construction, wrapped in Tyvek like half-opened Christmas presents. And by the way guys, that is the kind of Christmas presents you certainly don't want. Anyway, I parked on the shoulder because the new street had signs that said residents only and no construction parking, and I was not trying to get towed seconds after landing. I got out and just stared. My brain was fuzzy from travel, but not fuzzy enough to miss what I was seeing. The 4 finished houses were neatly spaced along a curve. I could feel exactly where my old survey stakes used to stick up because I'd walked it enough times to memorize the corners. The second I saw the orientation of the houses and where the road cut in, my stomach dropped. There was no way this was right. The edge of one driveway lined up with where my north boundary should have been. The cul-de-sac at the end, dead center of where I used to park my beat-up pickup to sip coffee, I must have looked like I was casing the joint because a guy in a safety vest with a clipboard walked up and hit me with the fake friendly tone you use on door-to-door salespeople. "Can I help you?" "I own land here," I said. Or I did. "Where's lot 27? He checked his clipboard. "HOA doesn't have a 27. We've got 1 through 19 though." "You looking for the older subdivision up the hill?" I pulled out my phone and brought up a scan of my plat. "I'm looking for parcel 16B32, meets and bounds starting at the iron pin at the northeast corner of..." He actually laughed. "Buddy, if you've got a meets and bounds deed, you're probably talking about the east side of the highway. This here is HOA Phase 1, all recorded. If you're not a worker or homeowner, I cannot have you wandering around. It would be a liability." There's a thing that happens when your brain tries to process 2 realities at once. One says you're standing where your land should be, and the other says that this is a development with an HOA and marketing materials. Both cannot be true. I left without arguing. I'm not really the type to make a scene with a guy in a vest who probably had nothing to do with any of it. So I went home, grabbed my big red folder and drove straight to the county recorder's office because if there's one thing I know, it's that paper beats vibes. The county building had not changed, same atmosphere, same clerk who has seen it all and then some. I gave her my parcel number and asked for the full chain of title and any subdivision plats recorded in the last few years in that quarter township. She raised an eyebrow at my stack of documents like she recognized "this is gonna be a long one" customer. She printed, copied and stapled and pointed me to the microfilm because apparently the original survey from back in the day is only on those little spools that make you feel like you're in a movie. I sat there for hours comparing my original plat, my meets and bounds, the GIS maps, and the new HOA subdivision plat. Well, here's the short version. The developer bought land adjacent to mine and then recorded a subdivision plat that extended their boundary line over the top of my parcel like it was all one piece. If you overlay the two, they shifted one corner by about 15 feet on paper, which cascaded into a lovely trapezoid of chaos that swallowed my little rectangle. And by the way, guys, if you would be in this situation and an HOA is stealing your land, what would you do first? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, it would be awesome if we could reach 1000 likes on the video, just so I can fight back against the damn YouTube algorithm. I gotta say, the YouTube algorithm is one of the things that is even worse than an HOA Karen, let me tell you. Either way, if you're not into maps, imagine taking your neighbor's fence post and sliding it over just a bit so your yard gets bigger. And then you pave over it. That's what they essentially did. To anyone wondering how this could get recorded, it happens. It shouldn't, but it does, especially when you've got a developer who brings in their own survey, a rushed planning meeting, and a county office that is overwhelmed. The recorder's office doesn't go out and physically verify lines. They file what is presented if it meets the paper requirements. It's on the surveyors and developers to be right. If they are wrong, the court gets to have a party later. I asked the clerk if anyone had challenged the plat, and she said no, no objections, no notices returned. That didn't shock me because I was literally out of the country and my mailing address was a PO box set up to forward. If they send notices and they got forwarded in a pile of other junk mail from a subdivision I'd never heard of, I probably thought it was landscaping flyers and ignored them, so that's on me. But it's also not on me in the legal sense because, again, you cannot erase a deed by sketching a new map. The next stop was a real estate attorney. I didn't go in guns blazing. I walked in with my folder and my laminated plat like a nerd and said, I need to know if I'm crazy. And he looked at everything. He looked at the recorded plat for the HOA, he looked at my deed, he pulled up the county GIS and squinted. He chewed on his glasses like attorneys do on TV when they are thinking. And then he said something that stuck. "You're not crazy. Your deed predates their plat. They built on your land." He told me my options and there were quite a few passed. So quiet title action to confirm that I still own what I think I own and to resolve any disputes, trespass and ejectment to get them off my land, or an injunction to stop further construction and damages. He also asked me a question I wasn't ready for. Do you want the houses? Do you want to sell the land underneath them? Do you want them removed? What outcome do you want? My first gut reaction was scorched earth. And by the way, guys, let me know in the comments, what outcome would you want in this situation? Would you be reasonable with, admittedly, unreasonable people, or would you go scorched earth as far as you can go? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, the practical side of me asked if there was a way to fix it without tearing down someone's dream home, except then he called the HOA's attorney to open a line of communication, and that dream home sympathy evaporated in about 2 minutes. The HOA attorney was not the developer's attorney, by the way, that's important. HOAs and developers are often tied at the start, but once the developer's hands off, the HOA is its own beast. In this case, the HOA had been set up by the developer and controlled by a board made up of developer people until a certain number of houses sold. They were still in that initial phase, so even though the voices were different, the arrogance was the same. The first call was civil, we sent over the documents and a demand to stop building on the disputed parcels until it was sorted out. The response came back faster than I expected, and it was a whole lot of no. They claimed that they had a recorded plat, they claimed my deed was vague, and they claimed the county had approved the boundaries. They claimed I was confused, and they claimed they had no notice of an adverse claim, and that even if there was one, it was de minimis. My attorney put the email on speaker metaphorically and gave me the look that says, "They think you're bluffing." And well, I was not bluffing. The attorney said we could rush to court for a temporary restraining order to stop further construction, and he asked me if that was what I wanted. I asked how long would it take to get a hearing. He told me, and I asked if a TRO would actually stop them, or if they would just shift the framing by 3 feet and pretend compliance. He said sometimes developers push the line and act first and ask forgiveness later. I asked what would make the most airtight case, and he leaned back, sighed, and said, "Honestly? Let them finish. Let them go as far as they are going to go. Document everything, make it so there's no way they can claim they didn't know that or that it's not substantial. Then we ask the court for the remedy the law provides, which is ejectment. That means removal. You will be the most hated person in HOA for a while, but the law is pretty clear. If someone builds on your land without your permission and without good faith belief that it is theirs, that structure is a trespass. The court can order them to remove it. I sat with that for a week. I walked the HOA neighborhood at different times when workers were not around. I did not trespass in buildings, but I stood on the public sidewalk and looked like a low-budget inspector. I watched families tour model homes on weekends with a sales agent chirping about community and amenities, like they were selling membership to a club. I watched them pour driveways on what I knew in my bones was my dirt. I watched them plant a maple tree and laugh about the name. Every time I thought about pulling the ripcord and filing for an injunction immediately, I remembered the HOA attorney's response and then got angry again. I kept my head down, I took photos from public right away. I saved screenshots of the builder's website where they helpfully listed which lot corresponds to which address, and I printed the MLS listings when they hit. I noted that 3 of the 4 finished houses already had pending offers. I took a picture of a moving truck one morning and wrote down the date. The plan was simple, they were going to bury themselves in their own paperwork. They were going to sell houses built on land they didn't own with warranties and HOA disclosures and all the usual closing documents, and every piece of that was gonna be evidence that they acted without even doing the most basic due diligence. We filed the quiet title action and the trespass/ejectment complaint a little later than we could have, not because we didn't care, but because we wanted the construction to be substantial in the court's eyes. We also recorded a lis pendens, which is a notice to the world that there's a lawsuit affecting the property. That was key. The minute the lis pendens hit, the HOA sent a panicked email because their closings stopped dead. Title companies will not close when there is an active lawsuit clouding the title. They said that we were trying to extort them. We were not. We were just trying to stop people from buying a defective house on top of a giant legal problem. The HOA said we were costing families their homes. My attorney said, your developer built on land they didn't own, and that is when it got nasty. The HOA president emailed me directly, mistake number 1, saying that I was a squatter and that I did not deserve to block progress. He said that they would take care of me if I would agree to a fair price. The number they offered was less than my purchase price years ago, not less market value, less what I actually paid back then. I forwarded the email to my attorney and he said not to respond. A week later, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's law firm accusing me of slander for telling people in the neighborhood that they had built on my land. I actually had not told anyone anything, I had not even posted on Facebook, they were bluffing and fishing for a response. We ignored it and filed our service of process, which is the legal way to say, you've officially been sued. They were served at a board meeting, I'm told it was awkward, the developer finally showed up in the mix at that point. They had been operating through shell entities with names like HOA Development LLC and HOA Builders LLC, by the way, I anonymized those names for privacy, with addresses that were basically PO boxes. They hired a big regional firm and came in hot. They claimed their survey overlaid correctly, they claimed adverse possession, which is hilarious because, trust me, you don't get to adverse possess a platted piece of land with recorded taxes and a current owner who lives overseas for work and pays every bill on time. They claimed good faith. To claim good faith, they would have to show that they reasonably believed they owned the land. That is tough though when my deed predates their purchase and they had noticed the entire time that it existed in public records. The county got dragged in as a third party for approving the plat. That is standard. The HOA tried to distance itself, saying they only manage common areas. That would have been cute if they hadn't recorded CC&Rs, conditions, covenant, and restrictions that literally describe boundary lines, including my rectangle, and if they hadn't collected dues from people living in these houses on my land. At one point, someone suggested that I could just join the HOA. I laughed out loud. Hard pass. Let me pause here to say though, I know this sounds like I'm made of money to be doing all this. I am not. Legal fees are expensive and the stress is not free. But title insurance exists for a reason, and my policy covered legal defense to protect my title. That was a lifesaver. Also, we were not doing this on vibes, we had actual recorded documents and a surveyor who staked the original corners when I bought. That surveyor came out again with his tripod and his fancy GPS stick and confirmed everything to the inch. He put new pink tape on the stakes, he took photos and wrote an affidavit. Then, like a cherry on top, we found the iron pin at the northwest corner, exactly where my deed said it would be, buried under 3 inches of dirt and some mulch that a landscaper had kindly spread to make a model home look nice. I could have cried. We went to the first hearing on the motion for a temporary injunction. The courtroom had that hushed vibe like a library that's about to kick you out. My attorney was calm though. The judge was one of those people who radiates, "I've seen shenanigans worse than this" energy. The developer's attorney blustered about jobs and progress, and the HOA attorney tried to paint me as an opportunist trying to leverage a mistake for profit. My attorney said a single sentence that shifted the room. "Your Honor, we're not here to extort anybody, we are here to assert the property right recorded years before any of this. These houses are trespasses." The judge asked a lot of questions. He asked the developer why they didn't get a boundary line agreement signed when their survey didn't match the prior records, and they danced around it. He asked the HOA if they had title to any of the land in question, and they said no. He asked the county if the plat approval included a field check. The county attorney said it didn't. It's an administrative review for form, not substance. The judge set a schedule, told everyone to keep their tempers, and said that he would take the temporary injunction under advisement. He also warned the developer that continued construction on disputed parcels could result in sanctions if they ultimately lost. They kept building though, not on the 2 disputed half-lots that overlapped the worst, but on everything else, like they could outpace the lawsuit. They rushed to get closings done, and on the 4 finished houses for which we had recorded the list pendants. Title companies, bless them, are not suicidal though. Those closings did not happen. Buyers got itchy. The model home sales agent started getting passive-aggressive, telling prospective buyers that one disgruntled person was holding up the neighborhood. I know this because one of the buyers reached out to me through my attorney and said he didn't want to buy anything that might get bulldozed. He had seen the notice recorded and went down the rabbit hole. People think I had a vendetta against the families. I actually didn't. My beef was with the people who put a street on top of my deed and then tried to bully me into selling it back at a discount. The hearing on the merits came a bit later, and by then something else had happened that poured gasoline on the fire. One of the finished houses had actually closed. I found out because a new deed popped up in the recorder's index transferring title from HOA Builders LLC to a family trust. The title company had injured over the list pendants because they chose to tie the legal description to the HOA's plat lot number, not my meets and bounds, and they took the position that the list pendants didn't specifically describe the lot in question. It was a messy, risky choice. They basically bet on the developer winning. My attorney's face when we read that would make a great meme. It also made the judge's eyebrows climb when he saw it. At that point, any opportunity for a gentle, neighborly solution evaporated. We amended our complaint to add the buyers as necessary parties. Because their house now physically sat on land I held a title to, I felt crappy doing it because they were just trying to buy a home, but legally they had to be in the case if the court was going to decide what to do with the structure they lived in. The buyers lawyered up immediately and turned their fire on the developer and the title company, which honestly was appropriate. They countersued for fraud and negligence, and suddenly I was not even the villain in their eyes anymore. The HOA tried to play mediator by sending out a newsletter that basically lied about what was going on, so my attorney sent them a cease and desist about mischaracterizing litigation. They toned it down after that, and we went to mediation once. The developer offered to buy my parcel at market value pre-development. The HOA offered to waive my dues forever if I would deed the overlapping strips to the association. That was the funniest moment of the day. I said very calmly that the offer had to cover the cost to remove any structures not permitted to remain, the loss of use during the years they trespassed, my fees, and a premium for the risk they shoved onto me. They countered with a number that would not buy a used pickup. My attorney ended the mediation with a polite, "We will see you in court." The court phase got into the weeds, surveys were entered into evidence, a guy with more letters after his name than in it explained to the judge how the original plat's bearings are the baseline and how the developer's survey had used a different basis of bearing without reconciling, which is the mapping equivalent of changing the ruler mid-measure. We brought the iron pins. Not physically, but with photos, GPS coordinates, and testimony, the developer's surveyor tried to cast doubt, but he looked less confident each time he had to answer why he didn't check for existing markers. The judge listened, he asked smart questions, and he took it under advisement again. The decision came in the middle of an ordinary week. I was doing laundry when my attorney called and said, "Sit down." The court had ruled in my favor on the title, my deed controlled. The HOA plat was valid for the parts it properly covered but void as to the portion it overlaid on my parcel. The court found that the developer had actual or constructive notice of my title. It granted injunctive relief and ordered ejectment of structures encroaching on my land. The opinion was dry, as they always are, but there was a line in there about reckless disregard for recorded property rights. That one made me smile, and then it got real. The order gave them a deadline to remove encroaching structures, restore the land to its prior condition, and barred them from using or accessing it in the interim. It also awarded me costs and attorney fees against the developer, and the HOA got tagged for parts of it as well because they had enforced CC&Rs against the buyers as to property the HOA did not have authority over. The county was basically told to clean up its plat records, which is bureaucratic speak for fix your clerical mess. You would think that they would comply, but they didn't. They filed an emergency motion to stay the ejectment, arguing that it would cause irreparable harm to the families. The judge considered that and basically said, "You should have thought of that before you poured foundations." He denied the stay. He did give a brief grace period for the buyers to move out with help and for the developer to arrange storage of their belongings. That was considerate. It still didn't make it less of a train wreck. The HOA called a special meeting. They sent out a notice to homeowners of HOA in all caps with words like crisis and unity. Someone sent me a copy because, of course they did, the board president wrote that they were under attack by a land speculator. That provoked an eye rolled so hard I saw the back of my skull. They announced an emergency assessment to fund appeals. I almost felt bad until I remembered that the board members had brushed off our warnings when it would have been easy to pause and check. The emergency assessment did not pass. Enough homeowners were furious at the developer and the board that they wanted no part of paying for someone else's mistake. The demolition day was surreal. Even now, writing this, my hands shake a little thinking about it. It started early, the developer had exhausted their emergency motions. The sheriff had posted the writ, the judge had made it clear that the order was not a suggestion, the buyers had moved out with help from the developer and were in temporary housing paid by the title company, who had realized that they were about to write a massive check and were in damage control mode. Reporters showed up because nothing draws a camera, like heavy machinery knocking down expensive things, a camera crew set up across the street. A handful of neighbors, covered with expressions ranging from sad to angry to morbidly curious, the HOA president showed up and tried to block the crew with his body until a deputy told him to move. He shot me a look that could strip paint. I didn't engage though, I had nothing to say to him. The excavator rolled in like an elephant, the operator was calm, professional, and clearly not there to debate property rights. He swung the boom and gently, almost tenderly, tested the roofline of the first house. The house groaned, the sound was awful and satisfying at the same time. It didn't fall all at once like in movies, it folded slowly like a sandwich made by someone who hates bread. Siding popped, window spiderwebbed, the second bite took the living room wall and exposed the fireplace. Someone next to me made a strangled sound. The operator kept going though, debris got misted with a hose to keep down dust, turning everything into a damp grey mush that smelled like wet drywall and hubris. The HOA president, because he couldn't help himself, sidled closer and hissed at me, "You didn't have to do this." I finally looked at him and said, the only full sentence I said to him in person, the entire saga, "You could have checked a map." He opened and closed his mouth like a fish and walked away. A neighbor muttered, "Good." I didn't smile. It was hard to smile watching a family's ex-living room collapse because of stupidity that started way above their pay grade. However, it was satisfying in the justest sense, but not joyful. Still, I cannot sit here and pretend it was not the exact outcome the law demands when someone builds on land they don't own. If you let people take your property because it is inconvenient to enforce your rights, you don't have rights, you have suggestions. The second house went down even faster. The third and fourth were easier because the first had softened the shock and because it turns out once sheetrock turns to mush, walls buckle like nothing, the under construction houses got knocked down to slabs and then the slabs got jackhammered and then the lot got scraped back to grade. The developer was on site with a phone glued to his ear arguing with someone about cost. He looked smaller than he had in court, the surveyor who testified for them was nowhere to be seen. The title company sent a representative who looked like they had aged a decade. A week later the developer filed for bankruptcy on the entity that owned the construction company, but that didn't surprise anyone. It is textbook to try to shield assets when judgments loom. We had anticipated that, and my attorney had been careful to tie liability not just to one shell but to several related entities. The HOA quickly found itself without a sugar daddy. Their assessments were set based on a budget that assumed a bunch of occupied homes paying dues. That evaporated overnight, they couldn't meet obligations, the landscaping bill bounced and the water for the common area got shut off. The fountain at the entrance got turned off and algae bloomed like a swamp. It smelled like a biology lab. The fancy stone sign grew weeds at the base. A week after that, the HOA filed its own notice that it was insolvent and seeking to wind up. People like to ask me at this point if I feel bad for the homeowners who bought in. Yes and no. I feel bad that they were misled and used as pawns in a developer's rush and an HOA's pride. I don't feel bad for the board members who wrote me emails calling me a squatter and accusing me of extortion. I don't feel bad for the developer who ignored a recorded deed that didn't fit their plan. I feel fine about teaching a lesson the only way that carries weight, through a judge's order and a demo crew. The aftermath took longer than the demolition itself. The court appointed a special master to help untangle the mess. The buyers who had closed got buybacks from the title insurance to rescind the sales plus damages. The buyers who were under contract got their earnest money back and then some, and the builder's lender took a bath. The surveyor's insurance company got involved and probably wrote a check big enough to make anyone cry. The county updated the plat maps and added a notation about the voided section, so nobody can pretend it didn't happen. My quiet rectangle was quiet again, except for the sound of trucks hauling away rubble and the occasional neighbor walking their dog and giving me a thumbs up or a glare, depending on their politics. We went back to court one last time to settle fees and damages. The court awarded me costs for having my property tied up for years plus the attorney fees, and people who hear the story always ask if I could have just sold the land under the houses. Technically, maybe, there's a concept called a ground lease where you own the land and someone else owns the structure and they pay you rent. It is used in some cities. In this case, I did not want to become a landlord to houses that were built because someone ignored my deed though. Also, the buyers were never gonna be happy living over a lawsuit, their HOA would have been a nightmare, the cleanest solution was to reset the board, it was not the easiest emotionally, but it was the cleanest legally. If that makes the villain in some other universe, I can live with that. For the record, I never wanted an HOA's destruction on my resume. I know some people on here will cheer that part and I get it, HOAs can be petty dictatorships, but some are fine and serve a purpose. And by the way guys, let me know in the comments, do you think OP went too far here, and what would you have done if you were in this situation? Would you have also let the houses get destroyed? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, this one could have been fine if the board had done the most basic thing, which is slow down and check a map when a stranger emailed with concerns. Instead, they went full entitled and doubled down each step of the way. They made it personal, and that's why they lost. Not because I'm some mastermind, because they were arrogant. And the next one is another malicious compliance story, which is titled "Making them cold just seemed like the right thing to do." So I used to work in a retirement village with a communal restaurant/dining room. There was this awful family who, despite being only a 15-minute drive away from the village, would almost never visit their mom, and we can call the mother Sam. Sam was kind, Sam's family were constantly neglecting to provide items such as clothing, and most of Sam's valuables had in my opinion been stolen by them. As they were the power of attorney for financial, personal and health matters, nothing legally could be done apparently. Well, fast forward to a hot Australian Christmas day, the village is hosting a Christmas lunch for the old people who didn't manage to go out for the day. Families were welcome, but you had to book ahead. The invitation clearly said to bring a jumper, as the AC was very cold to cater for the constant opening of the dining room doors with guests coming and going. Naturally, Sam's family failed to book a seat and had to be accommodated last minute. Naturally, they were the only ones without a jumper too. I got the privilege of finding them a place to sit, so I dressed Sam in an extra warm nice outfit and set up the table under the big main AC vent. 10 minutes later, Sam's annoyed son and daughter-in-law approached me and asked, "Can you please turn down the air conditioning? It is too cold." "Yeah, no problem, I can do that," I said, and I did. I turned that AC down an extra 4 degrees, I think to 16 degrees Celsius if memory serves right, which is insanely cold, and Sam's family left earlier than any other family, and Sam was able to spend the rest of Christmas with people who spoke to her like she was a human being. Also for context, a jumper is a sweater or jersey. We also used jumper cables to warm up the old people until the Aged Care Commission decided it was a crime. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. If you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist on the left. I will see you again tomorrow.